we meet, ladies and gentlemen, at quite an extraordinary moment in the Middle East. We had to do this like an emergency event. And because over the last couple of weeks, we've had this long-running shadow conflict between Israel and Iran just burst into the open and escalated into something which is now, so much more deadly. For days now, as you know, the US and Israel have attacked sites all over Iran's territories, assassinating leaders, generals, and striking military sites. And in one shocking case, an Iranian girls' school in Mina was bombed, killing almost 200 children. We're still working through the details of who did that. In the days since, Iran has responded with missile and drone attacks targeting Israeli territory, US bases, and most surprisingly, the Gulf state cities, which we'll talk about. And it's had a knock-on impact, as most of you know, and most of you will very soon feel in your daily life, because they've closed the Strait of Hormuz. So you have the escalating oil prices, and no doubt we'll all start to feel the pain very shortly. You know, of course, that actually countries have already felt the pain. In the Philippines, I think they've moved to a 4-day work week. The Bangladeshis sent all their universities home. So already you are feeling the knock-on effects of this war. It's not limited in any way. And we'll be talking about all of those things tonight. We'll be taking your questions. We'll be talking about Lebanon, about Iraq, about the Gulf, about how the Arab governments are thinking, about the strategy of Israel, about the strategy of America, and so much more. So I will come to you later. But first, to discuss this, we have a panel. And I am joined by 4 people who have reported on and know the region extremely well. First, Tariq Ngarlu is an award-winning journalist and author who reports on the Middle East and humanitarian crises and has spent years covering the impact of conflict on communities across the region. She's also the author of The Heartbeat of Iran. Next, Dr. Renad Mansour is a senior research fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House and director of the Iraq Initiative, where his research focuses on political economy, state-society relations, and security in the Middle East. We're also joined by Liz Sly, an independent journalist and former Middle East correspondent for The Washington Post, who has spent more than 25 years reporting from the region, including stints in Beirut and Baghdad. And last but not least, Tariq Ali Ahmed is the head of the Research and Studies Unit at Arab News and the paper's media editor, where he oversees long-form reporting and is the executive producer of Frankly Speaking, the newspaper's interview show. So Tara, Renad, Liz, Tariq, all of you, welcome to the Frontline Club. We should start, Tara, with you, because the war is now it's about to enter its 3rd week on Saturday. What are you hearing about the mood inside Iran? Are people rallying around the regime? You know, we heard this statement from the new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, today. Are they seeing this as a moment of weakness? Are they rallying around the flag? What is your interpretation of what's happening on the ground?
Well, Faisal, thank you so much for having me. I don't think I would need a mic. Do I need a mic? Okay, well, I'm going to be mic'd. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on this panel, especially with Liz in particular, a veteran journalist, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity, Faisal. I was born, just for context, I was born and raised in Iran. I'm an American journalist. I spent more than 15 years covering the region, and my book, as Faisal mentioned, focuses on the people of Iran. So I say that because what's happening in Iran right now is multifaceted, and it reminds us once again that multiple things can be true at the same time. And that is the sentiment in Iran. You have a society of 90 million that is far from being a monolithic nation, okay? You have nearly 20 million of that population that are staunch regime supporters, some ideologically, some by way of financial and status, right? Because their existence depends on the regime. And then you have the rest of the population that have over and over and over shown us that they want to go move beyond the Islamic regime. They want to have a secular democracy. And how that secular democracy looks like is yet to be seen. How they ought to achieve that is yet to be seen. But I will say the most important grievance that exists among almost all Iranians is the economic challenges, okay, that have choked that country for over the years, much of it due to the sanctions, but also the corrupt economy that, by the way, much of it is owned by the IRGC. So today you mentioned the new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei. First of all, we never heard from him. We never seen him. We have no idea whether or not he's alive. I have sources in Iran, some say he's in a coma, some say he's been killed, some say he's injured, right? Or others, he's great and dandy. But the bottom line is he and his messaging and what is happening right now, Faisal, is that the most hardline factions in Iran are further emboldened. Right now, they have a younger facelift, and we are left with a situation, absent of regime change, that we went after the Taliban in Afghanistan, and we are left with the Taliban. And that is the main grievance of the Iranian public.
They went to topple Khamenei, and they got another Khamenei.
Exactly.
Khamenei,
exactly. And so I'm afraid of the day after, right, that we have a semi-failed state. We cannot compare Iran to Iraq or Syria or Libya just by way of geography and the population, okay? But I'm afraid of a day where we have a burnt state, a burnt field, as people are telling me in Iran.
Scorched earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And people, ordinary civilians, over 51% live below the poverty line, are left with, again, a more emboldened hardline regime that will eventually become a police state, and that will very unlikely negotiate with the West. And again, it will be detrimental to the people.
We'll come back to a lot of those questions, I think. It's just kind of as an overview. Renard, from a regional perspective, we'll come to some of the strategy in the Gulf states in a moment. But how big do you think the moment is? The Iranian writer Arash Azizi told me he thinks that this is the end of the Islamic Republic, even if the Republic survives in some sort of form.
I mean, I think it's certainly one of the biggest moments in the region. I mean, this is a 2003 moment. Where the Middle East ends up after this, no one knows. Just like no one knew. It was Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns. What would happen in Iraq after 2003. No one expected that Iran would develop its regional power in the way that it did after 2003. And so a lot of people, at least the Americans,
the
Americans were not planning. In fact, they thought they were going to go and take over Iran at that time. But nonetheless, the point here is it's a transformative moment for the Middle East. I think, what was said is important is Iran has changed its posture in the region. It's changed its defense doctrine and its security doctrine.
That's been a big change. We will get to it.
It's a big change. It's no longer hanging on to the status quo and getting slapped every now and then returning to the negotiating table and getting slapped again. It's enough is enough. And that's, I think, why this will change. I think to call, what was the quote? Someone died? Something was dead? Arash's quote.
Oh, no, I was saying that he said that he thinks it's the end of the Islamic Republic, regardless of whether the regime survives.
I mean, that just sounds to me more like a mission accomplished statement. What does it actually mean? I don't think most people think that the Islamic Republic is done. I think certainly it'll change. It'll fragment, but and it's in survival mode.
Yeah, well, I think that's what power is afraid of.
That's probably the point,
Yeah, that after the war ends, if the regime survives, it'll be a much worse regime. Let's keep going with it. Liz, I want to hear from you because you've reported on the region for such a long period of time and you've seen a lot of these upheavals. How significant a moment do you think it is? Do you think it is like 2003, like the Iraq invasion? Do you compare it to something else?
Well, as Renard pointed out, in some ways it's a continuation of 2003. Which itself was a continuation of 1991. So you could say that Saddam Hussein started this whole chain of events by invading Kuwait in 1990. The Americans who took over Iraq certainly did not anticipate the extent to which Iran would move in and insert itself into the architecture of Iran, and they turned of Iraq, and from Iraq more into Lebanon, into Syria, on into Yemen over those years. The Americans were very slow to pick up on that. And in some ways, by the time they did realize it was too late. And now we've got the pushback against that. The Gulf countries have been campaigning for years, since back in the early 2000s after the invasion of Iraq. They were pushing America to do more about Iran. They were terrified of Iran. They were wanting an American government to be more robust and aggressive against Iran, to curtail the very abilities that we've seen Iran unleash on them in the past couple of weeks. And now these chickens are coming home to roost. It's almost like be careful what you wish for, because now they have got a more aggressive president who is prepared to take on Iran and it's causing an enormous backlash for them. The extent to which this is damaging the reputation of the Gulf, and specifically the UAE, in terms of the PR that it's built up as a safe haven, a luxury home of sun and sand, where British tourists flock for winter sun. I don't know how long it's going to be, or under what circumstances all those tourists are going to go back to Dubai. It would have to be in a circumstance where Iran has been in some way defeated. And the way we're looking at it today, I can't really see a path to defeating this hardline and desperate regime, because the capacities they have are so mismatched to the capacities America has. They can clearly absorb a lot of bombings, but they've got thousands, perhaps 10,000 of tiny little speedboats, all hidden in little caves all around the coast that they can send out to blow up ships. Ships are not going to move if that risk is there. And so Iran at the moment has demonstrated that it is in control of the battlefield, it's in control of the narrative, and unless it is defeated, it will be able to call on that at any time in the future. It will become the de facto power controlling the world's energy supplies for indefinitely into the future.
We'll come to the Gulf stuff, because I think actually the audience will find that part really interesting. Let me just come to Tariq about the Arab governments across the region, because you're right. I mean, leave the Gulf states out of it for one moment, because we'll come back to them, because they've borne the brunt of this. But I mean, the Arab governments more generally, how are they feeling about it? As Liz has pointed out, a lot of these governments have been agitating against Iran, wanting some sort of confrontation with Iran, and the confrontation is here. Now they're getting what?
Well, yeah. Hello. Well, yeah. So essentially,
I think it's not on. Actually,
is it not? Oh,
no.
Sorry. Is this mic on? Look, the Gulf finds itself in and Arab governments within find themselves at a very precarious point. They either show themselves as too weak and keep getting hit with missiles and drones and whatnot, or get too strong and then suddenly open up the conflict further. Another huge aspect I think that's been underlying is the fact that this security umbrella, that so-called the American security umbrella that all these governments across the region have been promised by the U.S., did not showcase what it needs to be.
Right.
So essentially, we have the UAE, Saudi, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar finding themselves getting their airports hit, their desalination plants hit, which is a very important infrastructure within these governments.
Yeah.
So they find themselves having to either choose to kind of not put all their eggs in one basket, which is in the U.S., look more towards the east, see what happens over there.
Do you think that that's likely to happen? I mean, the American security umbrella, they've invested billions in that umbrella. To see that it isn't as, I'm trying to think of a rain-based metaphor, but to see that it isn't quite as useful at keeping out Iran.
Well, it's leaking.
No,
if you want to use
that is a good metaphor.
So the issue is that no matter who is president, all governments are going to be working with whoever's president, right? But the fact is that because we've been all waiting and we've all been hearing about this aggression, this as Liz was saying, this didn't happen yesterday. This has been simmering on for decades, right? And all these promises of security and bolstering through investments and whatnot led us to this place, and then suddenly you have reports of airport in Dubai hit. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's why I think the Gulf has to play a very sensitive and very precarious role of balancing, putting its investments across the world, both East and West, without angering the West for it actually hedging its bets by placing its eggs all across.
Okay, let's come to the Gulf states in a second, but I want to hear, Tara, about what you think is happening inside Iran, because the widening of this war, I wonder if, obviously it's a deliberate strategy by the Iranians, but I wonder if part of the way that they've interpreted such astonishing bombing by the Americans is that actually they've decided that maybe it's much better if we turn towards the regime and we just find a way to end the war rather than get it toppled. Or am I interpreting it the wrong way?
Repeat the last bit.
Well, just that when you have such a level of bombing. Now, there were some people, obviously, there were protests, and the protests were put down very hard. And then there was this suggestion by Donald Trump that help is coming.
Sure.
And you saw that at protests around the world, people did have that slogan, help is coming. They really believed that the Americans might try to topple the regime, and that
They
would
still
usher
do,
in-
by the way, which is ridiculous. So,
They still believe it.
yes. I mean, listen, I have yet to see a war or conflict, right, where missiles and bombs and airstrikes have brought peace, prosperity, and democracy. And please help me understand if I'm missing something. Was
Yeah.
there a place that we can think of where this happened? So put that aside. And again, I at this point could care less if I would be attacked online. I sit on various boards where we protect and defend journalists from online harassment. But this idea that the diaspora of Iran has, that somehow, some way, other nation states, including the United States and Israel, have the best interest of the Iranian people at heart is a delusion. Because again, help me understand where and when this has happened before. Okay, so that is number one.
You don't think that this might potentially usher in, Pahlavi 3, the new... No, why is there
Again-
laughter?
again-
Why is Reza Pahlavi, just because he's been in California all these years and is not his father?
Washington, Faisal,
Oh, I'm so
not
sorry.
California.
So sorry.
But again, it goes back to being realistic. It's this idea that, as cliche as it sounds, countries don't have friends; they have interests. Okay, so this notion that the Iranian people are going to have their savior be airdropped from somewhere in the West again is delusional, because history has shown us otherwise. Now, can foreign help assist in some shape or form? Sure. But then when we have objectives that are unclear, when the United States president 3 weeks ago says help is on the way, people of Iran, come to the streets, we are there to support you, and then 13 days into this war, the objectives are containing Iran's missile program in its entirety, cripple Iran's navy, which by the way was not at all part of the conversation, contain Iran's nuclear program, which we have not heard anything about, by the way. We have no idea where the enriched uranium is. It's a disaster on that front. And then the proxies in the region, who, by the way, are all out on all fronts. Iraq, Hezbollah is ready to go. Hezbollah, look what they're doing to Lebanon. We have yet to see the Houthis. So the objectives, unclear. So bringing it back to Iran, because I
But the
do want
Iranians,
to,
yeah.
yes, I want to answer your question, but this is why I said the issue is complex and multiple things can be true at the same time. Yes, the Iranian people, the majority of them know what they want, know what they deserve. They have probably the highest potential in that entire region. And I say this because, again, of the vast number of educated and young people, but they've been robbed from that. But right now in Iran, Faisal, we have a situation that this population is being bombed at a time that the economy, as I mentioned, is catastrophic. Daily workers are out of work. Businesses don't have a way to function. Iran financially is disconnected from the financial markets and the global economy. So in the case of Lebanon, we have friends and family who can send some money somehow,
Right.
but even in Iran, you can't have that. And the last thing I can add, I can go on and talk about this, but the last thing I would add is the IRGC, Faisal, again, like it or not, they've done pretty well, meaning they have planned for this for a long time, and they've done mosaic planning. And the president of Iran is irrelevant in all of this. Okay, it is the IRGC and the Sepah that right now have control, and the problem is that we have no idea who that one person is. It's a group of people, and they are dragging this to turn it into a war that time will fatigue the United States, and it will become a war of attrition.
Well, let's talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that strategy, actually, because the strategy is quite interesting. Renat, there was a line from your Chatham House colleague, Sanam Vakil, where she said that Iran's strategy is now to pressure everyone, everywhere, all at once. And I think that probably does describe the strategy. And as Tara was pointing out, it's a strategy that they had been planning for a long time. It's not something that they came up with as soon as they were attacked. Is somebody speaking to me or just speaking generally? No, you're fine? Okay, great. Yes. Yeah, so it does seem as if that was the strategy. Do you think that was a good strategy, or do you think it'll ultimately backfire?
So from the perspective of the region, this is the worst case scenario. I think everyone was fearing exactly this after October 7th, which was a Middle East all at war. And we now have it. And the Gulf countries, many of the countries, attempted in different ways to stop this from happening, but it's happened. And that's it. And there's no going back. And from the Iranian perspective, as I said, it became very clear that the status quo was not working. I think after October 7th, Israel shifted its posture and decided to remake the Middle East in the way that it wants to remake it. Iran was clinging on to a status quo that Israel was changing. And I think now Iran has finally awakened to the fact that the Middle East is transforming. And so this regional war is Iran's efforts to both change the Middle East, to push back on Israel's vision of the Middle East, but also to tell the region that you can no longer just hide behind external allies, and to tell the world that we're not just this country, as you know, Tara said, that can just be slapped every now and then through sanctions, through assassinations, through decapitations. I mean, the IRGC, I mean, Iran's, I mean, I don't call them proxies, but Iran's groups across the region have been decapitated. I mean, Qasem Soleimani was killed in 2020, Abu Mahdi was killed in 2020, Hassan Nasrallah was killed in 23. You know, Hamas's leader, they've all been killed, and yet they are there. And how many times have we heard the Axis is dead? How many times have we heard, you know, Iran? It doesn't happen. Instead, what you have after all these decapitation attempts is a fragmented Middle East that is so fragmented that now it's one of those transformative moments. You get one or two of these in a lifetime. And the Middle East is changing massively after this.
Liz, do you agree with that idea that this is a transformative moment? And if you do you think that the Middle East will welcome whatever comes next? It's still in the process of being born. Or do you think it'll be worse?
Well, it does depend what comes next. And I think it's absolutely impossible at this moment to see what comes next. One scenario, which is what we have at the moment, is a lingering rump IRGC extremist hardline government that continues to attack everyone, everywhere, all at once. And you almost cannot do business with that government. You can't now call them up and say, oh, let's talk, because they could unleash this again at any time on you. So that's why I think it's looking like it's a fight to the finish almost for everybody.
Right.
And if the Iranian regime doesn't survive, it definitely transforms the Middle East, because I think it can be hard to convey how much Iran has defined and shaped and driven the narrative of the Middle East over the past, certainly 25 years since the Iran invasion, and up to a point for decades before that. I'll just a very small anecdote from the first Gulf War, which was that the Americans pretty easily kicked the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and they were in Kuwait, and they'd occupied a little bit of southern Iraq. And George Bush said it's now up to the Iraqi people to take matters into their own hands, which the Iraqi people took as a signal to uprise against Saddam. And they did that. But the Americans didn't go to their aid. They allowed the Iraqis to fly the helicopters and didn't enforce the ban on the airspace, and the Iraqis crushed that. And one reason I was told that they did that was because the Iraqis who took to the streets to protest after George Bush made this appeal were waving pictures of Ali Sistani, who is the Grand Ayatollah, who's the religious leader for the majority of Shiites in the world, including almost all those in Iraq. Khamenei really only commanded the loyalties of the of Iranian Shiites and those who are aligned with the regime. And Ali Sistani bears an uncanny resemblance to Khamenei. And they were thinking that they were waving the pictures of Khamenei, and that this signaled that they were loyal to Iran, and they were more worried about Iran taking over Iraq if they went to Baghdad and toppled Saddam than they were about Saddam remaining in place. So
it's an astonishing story. It's an astonishing story from 1991.
Yes.
And it demonstrates, I mean, maybe others in the audience think it demonstrates something else, but to me it demonstrates something that I think we're seeing right now, which is they're not fighting this war for the Iranian people, just as they were not fighting that war for the Iraqi people.
And fear of Iran has driven so many decisions, big and small, and the failure to anticipate Iran has driven other decisions, but Iran has really been a defining narrative. And so if you do take up this regime, you really do have a new Middle East. Maybe you have a more peaceful Middle East. Maybe you have Americans saying we don't need bases in the Middle East anymore and we can pivot to Asia. Maybe you have Gulf countries saying, okay, we don't need you anymore, you can go now. But it's so hard to imagine. I just find it so hard to imagine that happening from what we've seen so far, and also without knowing a good count of like who's got what missiles left and who has
how many. Yeah, it might come down to
it might
just
come
the
down to
attritional
that
warfare,
arithmetic,
yeah.
which is very much what Ukraine, Russia has come down to.
Tariq, let's talk a bit about this, how it's playing out in the Gulf. I said to you that we'd come back to it. I want to come back to it now. One thing that the audience might be interested in this, that the Gulf states very rarely talk publicly about what they're thinking and what's happening behind the scenes. And sometimes these conversations kind of burst their way into the spotlight. That happened recently. I'm sure you were watching this. There was a really interesting exchange with Amr Moussa, who was a former head of the Arab League, and the Saudi journalist
Abdurrahman
Rashid. And I'll let you describe it, but the outline of it was that within Arab elite circles, there is a kind of conversation happening about who is to blame. Is it that the Americans have brought this war to the Gulf, or is it that the Iranians retaliating has brought the war? So that's the fundamental crux. Where do you stand on that?
Well, it's not really it's like a chicken and the egg situation, and when you tie in with international legal humanitarian law, you'd be like, oh, okay, based on international legal law, it was the US that violated the sovereignty of Iran, and then Iran violated the sovereignty of I don't think there's a point of looking back and thinking, okay, whose fault is that and what should be the case. It's more about bringing this conversation back to what you were asking my fellow panelists here about what this new Middle East would look like, and this fight to the death in a sense. So I'm Lebanese, born and bred, and unfortunately, right before this panel, as I'm sure many of you know, Lebanon, Beirut has been hit in several places, and I've been checking in on my parents and making sure they're all okay and whatnot. The reason I say this is because we are Lebanese, like there's a faction of Lebanese that is just standing idly and watching themselves getting dragged in. Similarly, in the Gulf, you have the same thing. People in the Gulf who have invested themselves in the Gulf, they don't have to be from the Gulf, but they're from the Arab world, all living lives in Dubai and Qatar and Erbil and whatnot. So them being dragged by something as huge as what's going on now, which is, I believe, when you look at, and this is my belief only, is that if you really ask many people on the ground if this was really deserved to happen, I bet you that only 20% would be in agreement with the fact that yes, we should be taking on Iran, and yes, Trump should have blasted Iran. So Hezbollah, I grew up in Lebanon and I'm from the south, and every time we used to go to the south, I would see Hezbollah flags and I'm like, what is this? I don't like this, blah, blah, blah. So I was raised, thankfully and luckily, in a secular household. But on the other hand, you have people who were raised in the south, born and bred to the idea that the US is the enemy, Israel is the enemy. And now, finally, they have this moment where they can go head to head with this quote unquote devil that they have been preached to fight against.
Right.
So this is why now they are ready and they're fighting, and they're not worried about dragging everyone down with them, because at the end of the day, this is what they were kind of brought up
for. This
for.
confrontation.
Yeah. So I don't think so. Looking back and thinking, oh, whose fault is it? Looking ahead is the only way, and this is where state institutions need to rally up. This is where Lebanon's government needs to take over. People rely on Hezbollah because because the state's not there for them to rely on.
Yeah, right.
So you need the Lebanese state to come in. But then again, if the army is sitting in the south and it's told to arrest Hezbollah members, but an Israeli shooting at him, he's gonna shoot at the Israeli. He's not gonna arrest a fellow Lebanese person. And it's a very precarious situation.
And that's you're just describing one country.
Exactly.
Now imagine spread it out across all these other countries.
Precisely.
Okay, we're going to come to the audience. I'm going to come to you twice, so we're going to come to the audience in a moment. So think about the questions that you have. We'll do a couple. But before we come to the audience, in a questions that will no doubt inform what you ask me about, we'll talk about the United States. Tara, from the perspective of many in the region, how is the United States' role in these strikes being interpreted? Is it a limited intervention? Is it the start of a pattern, as the Israelis call it, mowing the lawn? This is now the second strike on Iran in 6 months. Do they think it's the start of a new pattern? Do they think it's a limited intervention? Do they think it's 1991 with the Kurds uprising? What do they think?
Again, I try to keep it tight because it is a very complex scenario, and Iran is not a monolithic society. A few things. The role of ideology, by the way, within the regime base is huge, and we cannot discount that, because those who are fighting right now for the IRGC, again, they are the most aggressive, radical, staunch supporters that are only further going to be emboldened. So let's park that on the side. Also, the threshold of the Iranian regime is so high, and we've seen that during the Iran-Iraq war, and they are a regime that has perhaps the highest threshold in that entire region, and probably one of the greatest in the world.
But by threshold, you mean its ability to
absorb
pain
and
still,
yes, and
right.
still function.
And the Iran-Iraq war, for those who don't remember, was a 10-year war of attrition between the...
Yes, 8 years. 8 years. 8 years, over 1 million deaths.
Take the microphone.
But Faisal, that reminds us again of something that I think more than ever right now is pivotal. That humanizing people, talking about the civil society, and as you mentioned, this is a new beginning of whatever that beginning looks like, right? And unfortunately, in the case of Iran, the Iran story on the global stage has only been told through the regime, through a monolithic viewpoint and lens of the Islamic Republic, and not the rest of the population. And that is why we have failed to create ground for the nation of Iran, for the people of Iran to join the international community. We're beyond that point. We're not there yet.
You've done a very good job. I don't know if those of you follow Tariq and Garlu on social media, but you've done a very good job of trying to humanize him. You've been out and about a lot, making videos, telling people what you've been hearing on the streets in Iran. Do you find when you are in TV studios, and you were in a TV studio just now, Tara walked into the Frontline Club and was taking off her TV studio headset. So that's how engaged you are.
Embarrass me so much.
But you've done a great job. But I wonder how you feel going into these studios and talking about what's happening in Iran. And as you say, it's a complicated scenario. But do you find that sometimes it gets flattened, that it gets reduced?
Absolutely, and not just with the case of Iran, with the case of Lebanon, with the case of Syria, with the case of Iraq. I mean, every conflict that I've covered, as my colleagues have, people take the back burner, Faisal, and also the issue that, again, I hope this is a moment for us to learn, for all journalists and policymakers, and this is what I teach my students at Georgetown. Humanizing is not normalizing challenges. So if I humanize the challenges and grievances of the Iranian people through their stories, through their aspirations, through their hopes and dreams, I mean, every single in this room probably have heard of the soccer team in Australia, right? But what we are not hearing, other than how the story has been politicized, is that there are extremely talented athletes in Iran, brilliant female, professionals in all specs of life that have pushed forward against the repression and the confines. But that's what we failed, and that goes back to the point I was trying to make, is that, and to answer your question and wrap it as fast as I can, is that the Iranian society right now looks to the east, it sees Afghanistan, looks to the west, it sees Iraq, and wonders what's next for it, and is left at the moment on this day with a regime that is more emboldened, more hardline, and is controlled by the IRGC at a time that it's still wondering, maybe, just maybe at the end of this, the day will be brighter, but we don't know that because we have no idea what the United States and Israel has planned. And that goes back to my first point. At the same time, there are factions within the society that what's happening has geared them more toward the regime. And there are also factions that have created a bigger distrust between the regime and also the United States. So it is complex.
Okay.
But again, the price is paid by the people.
Okay. Renard, Tara raised the question of what might happen depends on Washington's objectives. What are Washington's objectives? What do you interpret? What do you interpret that the Americans were actually trying to do by starting this war?
Before I answer that very difficult question, I do want to make a point about while following the people. So a few years ago, I worked on a documentary called Once Upon a Time in Iraq, and for the entire.
I'm so sorry, but I force my students to watch that and read the book
thank you.
every
Thank you.
year.
Was it necessary to say the word forced?
I mean, I don't know if they really want to, but I make them do it,
But I
and they
think-
love it.
So
It is a good documentary, though, Renat. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
we shouldn't be listening to us, no offense to our panel. We should not be listening to the politicians. We should be listening to the people there. And oftentimes in war, it's impossible to hear the actual people. And when we did Once Upon a Time in Iraq, it was the first time that Iraqis got to be the only ones narrating their own, analyzing their own situation.
But you see the
And-
difficulty, right? Because
of course.
how are we, I mean, you seem to be, as the kids say, catching strays. Everybody in the audience is getting attacked by you because of this. Well, why, how are we meant to know what the Iranian people are saying? The Iranian people were saying, we want this regime end, we're going out on the streets, we're protesting. The Iranian people had pictures of Reza Pahlavi. What does that mean? Does that mean they want the IRGC gone? Does that mean, no, you have to answer it.
She's covering the
Okay,
Iranian
all right.
people. I'll answer the Americans.
No, okay,
That's
but I mean,
easier.
it is an interesting point, right? About how do we actually know what these countries are? The
Yeah.
same thing was true in Iraq under Saddam.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know what it was? Now, the mistake the Americans made was they listened to Ahmed Chalabi in Washington, and it turned out that he wasn't telling the truth.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to make that point. I agree. It's very difficult to hear the people. I mean, obviously, but I mean, if you look at what's it's all about narratives right now. It's about geopolitics. It's about energy. It's about all of these huge ramifications for Americans who have to pay higher gas prices, right? I mean, these are the kind of conversations that are happening. It is impossible to hear the people. You're right.
Do you
but
think
I think
then-
that's one of the problems inherent in diplomacy and in politics.
do you think, I'll come to you to answer
Quickly.
my question, which Renat has refused to answer.
You talk.
Let's talk about the deterrence. What do you interpret the American objective here? Do you really think do you think it's deterrence? Do you think it's regime change? Do you think it is simply to create this sense in Iran that they have the ability to operate across Iranian skies? What do you think the idea was?
So I think, there have been different objectives articulated, if not on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, and it's at times contradicting each other. So it's hard to really say what the ultimate goal is. I think what became clear was we're going back to that idea of shock and awe, of military superiority, determining outcomes. And I think the Venezuela, example just showcased how easy it could be to just remove a head of state.
Right.
And this is not the first time that the Americans have thought that their incredible advancements in technologies, in intelligence, in military capabilities can easily remove a regime. And if the people are there and they hate the regime anyway, they just had protests, so of course they'll come out. So I do think that perhaps a lot of that is guiding, again, this type of policy making.
Did you feel, as I did, a sense of deja vu when
I would say one thing though. In my conversation, is this on the record?
it's being live streamed? So
shit.
yeah.
Okay. In my conversations with
Those of you watching at home, can you tweet out what he's saying?
No.
At Renard Mansour.
The worst thing I should have done is ask if it's on the. No. In my conversations with generic Trump administration people, the last thing they ever want to hear, and the last thing they always want to hear is anything historical. You bring up anything
right.
that's happened in the past, and they are turned off. It's about they even thought concepts like conflict management is a disgrace, because who does conflict management? We do conflict resolutions. We solve things, right? And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people who do not take stock of past lessons.
So what I was going to say to you about the deja vu is that I'm sure you've heard, like, a lot of the administration people have been saying to them, this seems like it might be Iraq. And the response is always, it's very different from Iraq, totally different. But it always ends up with the implication of, well, let's try it. And you think to yourself, I mean, you must be watching this. Iraq is your country and it was destroyed by the invasion. You must be thinking to yourself, we're just seeing the same story from 23 years ago again. Okay, Tara, do you want to talk briefly
Quickly,
about
yes.
how we know what people on the ground are thinking?
Very briefly, again, it takes back to my point of what I said, humanizing does not mean normalizing. And I think, again, we're too late to do that right now. But this is something that, again, journalists, policymakers, diplomats, writers, storytellers need to remember, that when the public in the United States or Europe or the UK, anywhere in the world, realizes how much they have in common with the people of Iran or Afghanistan or Syria or Lebanon, we are going to see a public discourse that is going to be different than what we see today. The idea that the take and understanding of the average American of an Iranian person is an Iranian that is represented by Ahmadinejad and the Ayatollahs, that is wrong. And this is what we're left with right now. Again, it's too late to fix it at the moment, but that is one of the problems of journalism and storytelling when it comes to places around the world that are not monolithic and deserve a nuanced and contextualized lens and storytelling and narrative. The second thing I would say is that when we have a situation, Faisal, in this day and age of digital media and Twitter and all of that, when a public cannot have civilized, sophisticated and contextualized discourse amongst one another, and they're constantly being attacked and targeted and harassed by one side or the other side, then they also lose legitimacy in the eyes of, the Americans in this case, or, any foreign country. And that is precisely what has happened to the Iranian diaspora, is that they're at each other's throat. And quite frankly, when I speak with Iranians in Iran, many of them tell me that it's a disgrace. It's embarrassing the way they're behaving.
Right.
So also that adds another layer. And if I may, just the last point I would make,
Briefly,
I promise, is one idea that exists among some Iranians right now in Iran who are trying to hold on to this tiny bit of hope and glimmer that maybe this might bring some change, is that perception that potentially this might be that plowing. Maybe we got rid of the first layer of the IRGC officials, and they're going to be the second layer, then there's going to be the third layer, and then potentially we might have capitulation and the surrender, and then somehow suddenly some great person is going to come and lead the country.
Right.
So that is also a scenario. But again, stories matter.
Can I just add something to that small thing? As a journalist, and I'm sure Liz can add something as well, but we find ourselves not only fighting with bombs and missiles and stuff, we're, as journalists, really pushing the forefront of trying to tackle misinformation, disinformation, even people's attention spans, let alone the ability for someone like, for example, my parents getting their news from WhatsApp. God knows who forwarded this message, but it told them to leave the building. So everyone's leaving the building.
Right.
It is extremely important because, again, this is tackling people's day-to-day lives. And we're at a time when now it's not that you wait for the 8 o'clock news and you get your dose of news and you're shut down. No, you wake up, you have a stream of notifications throughout your day. Ping, ping, ping. All you're doing is checking. And this could be coming from an influencer online, or it could be coming from the BBC, for all you know. But the fact is that the war on information and disinformation is, I think, as important as the physical war that's going on, because it's that war that's actually hitting home on people on the ground on their day-to-day, as opposed to whatever's hitting the Navy and the vessels and
That's very
whatnot.
interesting. I mean, you see it from both sides, right? Like, it's not just that the information, the misinformation is being pushed out from the ground, so to speak. It's also that the governments themselves benefit from it. So when you had this airstrike on this girls' school in Minab in Iran, you had 200 people. Now, our colleague Nilo Tabrizi has done some very good work on trying to figure out actually who struck it. I don't know if, now that we know that this is on the record, I don't know if we necessarily know who did it. What we do know is that it was struck by Tomahawk missiles, and I think there are only one party that has Tomahawk missiles.
It has been confirmed, though. I can say that. It has been confirmed that the U.S. is responsible, yes.
Right. So, but you see the misinformation in it, right? That the governments benefit from saying, we don't know who did this. Trump said, we think it might be the Iranians who did it. And so you're operating in an environment where the misinformation is not just coming from the ground, it's coming from the government. Liz, do you want to come in on that, or do you want to answer my question about?
I would just like to add on the journalism and the narrative thing. I do think the Iranian people themselves did an incredibly good job of seizing the narrative and teaching the outside world what Iranian people want, and that they are different from this regime and what they aspire to, with women, life, freedom, and the extraordinary protests of January, which really seem to be touching not only the activists and sort of usual suspects, civil society, middle class people, but really everybody in the country was coming out, and everybody in the country lost people. And so the Iranian people have themselves redefined, I think, what's understood about Iraq and what's known. and that there is an understanding in the world, I think that it would be kind of a good thing for Iranian people if this regime were to go. But the situation we're in at the moment is that the Iranian regime has seized back the narrative by not allowing any journalists in, by cutting off the internet so that people can't communicate what they're feeling or going through to the outside world. And they're showing very, very little of what's actually happening in terms of the American damage. And so the majority of the coverage we're getting is the spectacular Iranian strikes on the Gulf, on the other countries. We're seeing oil facilities in flames, ships in flames, and this is making the Iranians look very good and look very powerful and like they're in control of the situation. We don't actually know how much damage the strikes are inflicting inside the country
Iran, right.
on various layers of society and people and everything else. And yeah.
Okay. Tara, briefly, and then we have a second mic? Okay, great. So we'll come to you in a moment. So
I just wanted to add 2 lines to that, and that goes back to the reason we need nuanced coverage on this, because when the Minov school happened, the Iranian people in Iran, so many of them, and also those in the diaspora, were so quick to say, oh, this is the doing of the IRGC, this is the doing of the regime of Iran, because of this existence of lack of trust and the fact that they're so resentful toward this regime, right? And this is why, again, multiple things can be true at the same time. There can be multiple, parties who are guilty, and then at the same time, this idea that if we show the damage that the American and Israeli strikes have caused Iran, does that mean that we're now somehow supporting the regime?
Yeah, that's part of the narrative, too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to the audience. We'll take a couple, and then we'll come back to the panel. The lady over there. And then there's somebody there I can see, and then this gentleman here.
Firstly, thank you so much for such an incredible panel and talk. A lot has been said about the USA and Iran. Very little has been said about Israel. So the question is what do you think that the USA and Israelis' aim are the same in this?
Right, good.
I personally don't, but I'd love to hear from the professionals. And at some point, do you think that there'll be a divergence between the missions between Israel and the USA
as it goes on?
Goes on.
Good,
yes.
Thank you. And then who was this person here? I couldn't quite see. Yeah. I didn't want to say which gender because I couldn't quite see.
It's all right.
Hello.
Hi, Charlie Hancock, Moscow Times, independent Russian media in exile, so I can empathize with the struggles that those of you who cover Iran have about restricted information ecosystems and nuances in public opinion. But what I haven't seen since kind of the start of this war is anything really being reported about the response from the internal Iranian security services about repressions of the people. Because I remember in the protests at the start of this year, we were seeing reports of the absolute horrors that were being carried out, and that seems to be absent from a lot of coverage. So what is going on? What do we know?
You're talking about the repression that's happening right now?
Yes,
right,
whether there's any backlash, again, any actions being taken by the Iranian state against the Iranian people themselves.
Okay, and then, this gentleman here.
Thank you all. Ewan Grant, UK Defence Forum. I used the works of Tom Clancy in a lot of my TV and radio work. He was a prophet and a half on Ukraine, but his incredible prophecy on Iran is executive orders from 1996. I won't say any more because that will be a spoiler. My question is, following on from the lady's point, are there any indications that what is a very, very robust and deeply layered IRGC structure, there might be people breaking ranks and trying to do deals behind the scenes? Perhaps I'm just floating this, perhaps a wrong analogy, sorry about that, perhaps through any procedures for repatriation of the surviving crew of the sunken corvette and the crew of the support ship, which is apparently interned in Sri Lanka.
Okay, very good. So who wants to take the...
Can I take the first question, the Israeli question?
Yeah, okay, fine, go ahead.
So Israel, I believe, found itself in a very perfect positioning where it was able to convince the US that this is the right move, as well as open up a whole different front where it doesn't need the US's involvement because it's acting on self-defense by protecting its own northern border. Israel will not stop until it can safely get its citizens or settlers up north to northern Israel, right? And the only way it could do that is by ensuring safety. Today was the first time that the spokesperson for the IDF, which a lot of Lebanese now know, his face, Afikhai, who comes on and he told everyone to move north of the Zahrani. This is an extremely pertinent position because they're essentially propping up for a ground invasion. This is Netanyahu's war. He is working on, in my personal opinion, and this is on the record, a land grab, essentially. He's working on it. He's been working on it for a while. And now that he has a green light from the US of not doing anything, the Lebanese government, in a historic first, has been begging the Israelis to sit down face to face. This has never happened before. But if Israel sits down and has that conversation, then it'll have to hold back and take it easy and behave.
What do you interpret from am I pointing at the right person? I can't tell, the light is so bright. What do you interpret from the lady's point that there might be some divergence between the two of them as the war continues?
So I think, there's two different positions. The U.S. essentially is just focusing on Iran. Hezbollah for it is a byproduct that if the Islamic regime is toppled, therefore Hezbollah is toppled, and so it's a bonus. But if the U.S.-Iran confrontation ends on a standstill, let's say, the Israel-Hezbollah front will continue. And today they actually have announced that this is not going to be a short-term conflict. And ironic as this sounds, but Netanyahu has announced that the ceasefire from 2024 is moot. Now,
Shocking.
But
Amazing.
that means he's
not
essentially
respecting international law.
There you go. But he's opening up this door to the fact that he is going to do whatever he wants. And he has that green light for now. And he's going to take advantage of it.
Who wants to take the questions about... Yeah, okay. And then
I will briefly do that, and thank you for that question. I actually have been reporting a lot of that in my reporting. And that leads me to outline, if I may, the three worst case scenarios for the Iranian people. Okay, because it ties to your question precisely. Number one, the breakup and partition of Iran, which is something that has been tossed around by President Donald Trump. He was asked whether or not the map of Iran would look the same after the war, and he said, I don't know, probably not. And that is probably one of the issues that unites Iranians like no other. So that is one of the worst case scenarios, the partition of Iran. And we're seeing, talks about the Kurds and insurgents from Iraq and so on and so forth. The second would be the resurgence of groups like the MEK, Mujahideen Khalq. They were a sort of paramilitary cult group that were on the U.S. terror list until 2012. They lobbied their way out of it, and they have an office next to the White House. And they have been backed by the likes of Mike Pompeo and others. And this is, public information. So the idea of some group as such takes over is as bad as having the current regime. And the third one that goes to your question is the Iranian people being left with the crumbles and remnants of the IRGC and the regime that will most likely, as history has shown us, be more repressive toward the people. Because after any uprising, after any protest, the Iranian government has shown that their threshold to any form of dissent would be low, and the mass purging of, again, protesters and activists and intellectuals who want to speak their mind would be high.
Well, they've indicated, that they expect that when the war is over, that the people who have opposed it, or the people who have supported it, will be dealt with as
But
traitors.
absolutely,
That
and
was their
also
term.
yesterday, the head of police, Radan, who is really perhaps known as one of the most hardline IRGC officials, said the people right now, even Faisal, who come to the street will be treated as traitors. So this is currently, they'll be treated as traitors and they will be seen as agents, foreign agents. The second line that's coming, again, to your question, is they're threatening to essentially seize the assets of Iranian, dual nationals who live abroad, who are engaging in, any form of, support when it comes to this war. On top of that, I've been speaking to folks in Iran despite the internet blackout, and you hear, Basij forces on the street. Essentially, there are even checkpoints right now. By the way, the checkpoints last night, I've been hearing that drones were hitting Basij checkpoints. But the point is, when you have a police state, when you have a high security state, absolutely, it's just only going to get worse for people who are potentially going to rise. Last point I would say that no one's talking about is the political prisoners in Iran, who make up some of the brightest, greatest, most courageous groups of Iranians. They are in prison and they need to be talked about and discussed, because last year, in June 2025, we saw the Evin prison be hit,
Yeah,
and
apparently it was hit
that
again.
cannot happen again. So yes.
Does anybody want to?
I have a comment to make on that third question, but
Okay,
it's not
because
going
yeah,
to be
exactly,
particularly
please, yeah.
insightful because the internal politics of Iran are not something I'm specialized in. But I do think that scenario was one that the Trump administration was hoping would play out, just like it did in Venezuela. And in the about a day after the initial strike that killed Khamenei, somebody asked Trump about this, and he said, yes, well, there was a group of people we were talking to, but unfortunately they got killed in the same strike that killed Khamenei. And then a few days after that, somebody asked him the question again, and he said, yes, and there were some other people, but now they've got killed too.
Yeah.
So
One of my colleagues
it's
described it as catastrophic success.
Yes, it is almost funny, except it's not funny because people are getting killed. So
No.
were these people really talking to them? Who knows? Are there any more?
Who
It
knows?
Probably seems unlikely.
Okay, let's keep going. Yeah.
I want to add, it's also those in the region who are going to feel the effects of this violence. A few weeks ago, there was, I think last week actually, 2 weeks ago, a very prominent Iraqi feminist and women rights fighter, Yanar Muhammad, who was assassinated outside her home in Baghdad by these militias. And what we've seen each time that these militias are at war with the US, they take it out on their people. Hisham al-Hashimi, there have been many civil society actors and others who have been killed at this time exactly. It always happens when the US is in war in the region. So I think that's something to note across these
Very
countries,
interesting.
from Lebanon to throughout
Distraction is a huge.
Yes, so civil
huge
society is at risk when this is happening everywhere.
Very interesting. Audience, so let's take some people at the back, whoever that person is with their hand up, and then there in the grey, and then the gentleman here with the glasses, and then the person at the back there, please.
Aris Narala, former BBC World Service. It's regarding the Gulf countries. America has started a conflict and their defensive shield is leaking. What are the chances that the Gulf countries will push America away and either arm themselves, which Israel won't like, or perhaps turn to another superpower for protection, or perhaps a third option?
Very good, thank you. And then the gentleman here with the glasses, this one, the person here.
Hi, I'm Phil. We talked a little bit about the impact on civil society and also potentially the fallout from collateral damage, and particularly about MINAB. I'm just curious to understand what level of support we can see dropping basically as a result of MINAB and potentially future strikes that may affect the civilian population, because I think what the nightmare scenario seems to be is some form of gasification almost of parts of Iran if this starts to escalate much higher.
Right.
And I'd be curious to know what you feel about how opinions will change.
You'll take that one, and then the person at the very back.
Thank you very much for the talk. Dr. Anand, you mentioned earlier that the US administration isn't very mindful of historical precedent. I wonder how mindful they are of Shia ideology, that by assassinating Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, they immortalized him as, in the eyes of the IRGC base, as a leader who stood up against external kind of oppression and aggression. What role do you think religion could play in the resilience of both Iran and its axis of resistance? Of course, the Houthis, being heirs to the Zaydi tradition, also see themselves in that light of standing up, on the battlefield against oppression.
They have their own, a very interesting question, thank you. They have their own Shia figures. Renard, start with that, because that one is really intriguing. It isn't just a political question, is it? I mean, you're talking about a regime going back to 1979, full of ideology, with religious facets to it, this cult of martyrdom that I think Khamenei will be pleased to have been martyred, because a lot of people nodding, right? 100%. Because they feel, well, you can explain it better than I can, but Renard, start with that, because I think that's a good aspect.
I think it's also a good question because so much of the analysis right now is focusing on the politics and the economics. The IRGC has become a business and they make all this money and therefore they act rationally. And there's almost this idea that decision making is under this rational model. And people don't quite understand how ideology motivates behavior, even if it's against your rational, whatever that means, self-interests. I think Khamenei even had said in the past that, going out as a martyr would be the ultimate way to go. And he was 86, I think, or 86-year-old. Yeah, the questions were always around his health. I mean, for him to go out this way, after he had effectively really failed for a few years to protect his country, all those failures, all the repression that the regime, that he sat on top of was doing, it's all undone because now he's a martyr. And the same can be said, I can list you a dozen individuals who have been so problematic for their societies, but have gone down as martyrs.
I mean, Renard, the obvious one is Saddam.
Right now, many people in Iraq wish that Saddam could come back, and they see him as a martyr.
And a big part of that is to do with the way that he was executed.
And also, and the way he's executed, and why, when a military that's so superior destroys and cannot build back, whatever comes next becomes worse. And there's a statistic that's really important. I think it's something like 75% of these types of military activities produce a worse regime than a democracy. So the odds are against this.
Very interesting. Tara, comment briefly on the Khamenei story. I think
yes, no, indeed. So we're at risk of further radicalization amongst the staunch supporters of the regime, and this is something I mentioned. I just want to bring about a quote. A source of mine in Iran who has, in touch with a lot of these folks, said, Tara, one of the things that they're saying right now, these militia forces, they're saying that we're fighting for the 12th Imam, and he's our leader and he's our guide and we're in it. And the fact that someone in 2026 believes that they are fighting for an absent individual who presumably died 2,000 years ago tells us something. On top of that, this is why nuance is pivotal when covering and talking about the Middle East, is the word martyr, shaheed. If you go to an average Iranian person who lost a family member in any conflict and say, oh, your child or husband or family member was shaheed, they would say, no, don't call them shaheed. They're not, because they associate that with religion and the hardline ideology of the Islamic regime, and they don't want that. What the Islamic regime has done to Iran is that it has essentially delegitimized religion among the majority of the public, whilst emboldening the most hardline factions through that. But quickly, I want to come to the question on Minab, because that's extremely important when it comes to the civil society and its ability to provide support for the public. I will say, again, Iran has some of the brightest and most competent medical professionals, first aid workers, and individuals who in times of emergency can come to the rescue of the people. What Iran lacks is a government support, a management infrastructure to allow that. I mean, anywhere else in the world where strikes are happening, you see, you hear sirens and their bunkers and their shelters. In Iran, there's no such thing, right? The internet is shut, so people can't even get the messages that the IDF sends. So that's the challenge that the Iranian people are facing right now. The human resource is there. What's lacking is a government to support the professionals in that space.
Tara, do you want to come in on the question, or
I'll do both. Actually, I just want to add one small thing, is the fact that we also have to look at it that the other side is also it's preaching that this is a religious war. We see Senator Lindsey Graham go on and preaching about it being a religious and full aspect, the crusade. So you have two forces, both of them preaching religious tension, therefore both of them fighting to the end times. So this is the scary part. You have two sides going at it to the death. Who knows what will happen? Regarding the gentleman in the back's question with the Gulf, is that the Gulf will not ever turn its back on the U.S. I don't think that's very, very wise, and I don't think, and I know for a fact that they will not do that. But given this leaky security umbrella, they will essentially renegotiate forms of security, that be it having actual proper missile interceptors on the ground, especially now that the Strait of Hormuz is a key factor that Iran is in control of. On the other side is the Gulf, where had the US, for example, beefed up its security on that aspect, we wouldn't be in this situation right now with the Strait of Hormuz being fully on the Iranian side. So
let me just push back a little bit on that, because one of our colleagues, Sultan Al-Amr, has this argument that the military bases have become more of a liability for the Gulf states, because the US bases were meant to protect the Gulf states against the Iranians. Actually, they've become the reason the Iranians are attacking the Gulf states. So I wonder I'm surprised that you think there won't be any renegotiation on that.
No, there will be renegotiation for sure. And I agree that this has become a liability, and that's the excuse that the Iranians are saying, the fact that they're using their bases, despite the governments of the Gulf saying that they're disallowing their airspace from being used,
right.
you know? So
can I just come in on that? I mean, the main reason why they won't dissociate from America after this is that only America has the technology and the interceptors and the anti-missile weapons that have managed to mitigate what's happened to the Gulf. They are intercepting most of the missiles and drones that come. That wouldn't be happening if they had turned to another benefactor. I think they are in a much better position because of that. And also, one thing they're very disappointed and angry with Iran about is that starting in around 2019, that when there was a little mini crisis in the Straits of Hormuz, and the Iranians attacked the Saudi oil field at Abqaiq, the Gulf countries were furious that Trump said, "I'm not going to respond to that." That was precisely the reason they thought that they had an American security umbrella, so that if an attack happened like that, America would retaliate on their behalf. And then some Houthi missiles hit the UAE a couple of years after that, and again the Americans did nothing. They were furious. So since then, the Gulf countries have distanced themselves a bit from America. They have re-established diplomatic relations with Iran. They've declared themselves not part of the American-Iranian dispute, and they have made it publicly and privately clear to everybody that they will not allow their bases to be used for any American attack on Iran, and they are not being used for any attack on Iran.
And analysts are going online now, because the governments won't speak publicly, but through analysts of certain think tanks, they're speaking online about their dissent towards the U.S. about this. So there is bubbling fear.
So yes, I mean, they are furious with Iran because they thought that we'd appeased you a bit, we'd established relations with you, we haven't allowed our space to be used. The Iranians say every day we're only hitting the bases because you're using them to attack Iran, but they are not being used to attack Iran. So although it's been a liability that they have these bases I don't think it would protect them necessarily from being attacked, given that Iran is also attacking other countries that don't have US bases. And
that's a very good piece of history, because I think a lot of people have forgotten the anger in the Gulf when the Houthis hit Abu Dhabi and then the Saudis. They were furious that the Americans, I think this was Biden, didn't even call them to say they were sorry. And they were astonished, and I think it did sort of make them think, we need to find alternative sources. I suspect
it was Trump who declined to respond to the Abqaiq attack, and it was Biden who declined to respond to the UAE attack. And on both levels, they decided we can't rely 100% on America. But after Iran has attacked them anyway, despite their kind of slight distancing from America, I think the scale of the Iranian attack and the continued superiority of American weapon systems means that they will stay with America, at least for the foreseeable future.
Good. I think we will do one more round of questions in a moment. But before, I want to ask you about the election of Mujtaba Khamenei. This is the first time we heard from him today, or a statement. As an aside, Trump had said that he wanted to be involved in picking the next supreme leader, because he said we don't want an Iranian leader who will keep leading them into unnecessary wars. And there was a late night host who said, well, can the Americans get a leader like that? We could use one of those. What do you think about the election of Mujtaba? I mean, is it likely to be something more confrontational now with the US, or?
And there was a meme circulating with Trump in the assembly of experts with a turban and, you know, being part of the 88-member clergy that technically elects, you know, Iran's next supreme leader. So to that end, Faisal, you're absolutely right. We have not heard from this person. We have not seen him. And quite frankly, speaking with sources, some have told me, again, both plugged in, which is the absurdity of it all.
Yeah.
It's like, no, he's in a coma or he's dead. The other ones are saying, no, he's alive. But the bottom line is, it doesn't even matter. Because, again, the most hardline factions have been emboldened, and they're the ones running the show. So the ones in control right now in Iran, whether or not Mujtaba Khamenei is alive or not, they are the ones in charge. So many people thought Ali Larijani, the head of the National Security Council, who, by the way, had a whole lot of say in Iran's nuclear files over the years, would be the front runner when it comes to dealing with the US and the day after what Iran's foreign policy looks like. He's plugged in with the IRGC. The other person, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, he's the head, the Speaker of the Parliament, again, another IRGC figure. Another important person, Faisal, is the head of the IRGC intelligence, Hossein Taeb, who is, again, one of the most conservative hardline people in this regime. So the bottom line is, regardless of whether or not we have a Mujtaba Khamenei sitting somewhere in Iran, is irrelevant, because at the moment it is these individuals who have somehow, I don't want to use the word united, but are somehow running the show such that the regime continues, they maintain their survival, and they make it to that end of the day after the war. And quickly, if I may say, that when that day comes, Faisal, the Iranian regime is going to wrap their win their way, the Americans are going to wrap it their way, and the Israelis are going to package it their way. And what the Iranian regime is so good is to sell this narrative of win and martyrdom and survival to their base. And once again, we're left with a civil society that, as Liz said, has shown us what they want, which is to move beyond this regime, and are left to piece the crumbles of a further repressive and emboldened regime.
You mentioned memes online. I'm a big fan of memes. There was when those of you who follow Syria remember that they used to say during the uprising, Assad or we burn the country. They were saying a version of that with Khamenei. They got another Khamenei and they're still burning the country. Let's do some questions. Last round, please. Can we have some women, I think, this time? Is there somebody at the back? I can't see. Oh, hello. Yes, the lady in green over here. And then, okay, and then this gentleman, I think.
Hello, thank you very much. I'd like to go back to something that Tara said right at the beginning, which was about foreign governments being too susceptible to listening to vocal emigre groups. And I agree with that absolutely. I mean, from Balfour through to Chalabi, we've got all the examples. But I think the problem is that there are actually other examples. And one of them would be de Gaulle going back to Paris. Another would be, in fact, the Islamic Revolution in Iran. I mean, what would have happened if Ayatollah Khamenei had not actually been returned from Paris? And the third, which is sort of half an example, is Karzai in Afghanistan, which was very nearly a success, but then failed.
This is thank you so much. This is one of the reasons I love the Frontline audience, because they have such intelligent things to say. Because you're right, the Islamic, the 79 revolution is very much like the idea that a lot of people inside Iran agitating the return of Khamenei. Very interesting. I'm interested to see what you guys say about this. The lady here in the green.
Yes, my question, can you hear? It's regarding the possibility of a widening of the conflict and the role that perhaps other actors could play. I mean, I'm thinking of Russia or China. specifically in light of the energy crisis regarding Asia. And then also the role of Europe. At the moment, Europe, with the exception of Spain, has sort of tried to play without being involved. But when I look at it, I'm very concerned about the potential development of the conflict in the region and beyond.
Good, thank you, very nice. And would you like to make a comment? Yes, you.
Well, thank you very much. My question is simply, with the war industry, what else can governments create if not wars? They are the only ones who have the right to purchase what the war produces. Very often they own the war industry. And the armed forces are the slaves who blindly have to obey their orders. And they are the only ones to have the right to have armed forces. So how can you think, how can people think in general that a torpedo or a cruise missile is for defending life, for protecting, for protection? This is so absurd. While there is a war industry, there will never be peace in the world.
Thank you. Let's end on that one because I think that's a really interesting question. We'll come back to it. So just talk to me about about the revolution, about the idea of who do we listen to.
And I think actually both questions tie in very well, Faisal, if I may say so. First of all, it's interesting that we haven't heard much from the Board of Peace as of late. By the way,
Seems he's bored of peace.
right? No, but the reason I bring that up is because President Trump said something very interesting as he was speaking at the Board of Peace. He said the cost. We pledged $10 billion to this Board of Peace, and that is just a few days of war. And he said the cost of peace is so much less than the cost of war. And that is very true, and that goes to the other question that was raised, and I will stick with what I said, which is countries and superpowers have interests, and that is their own interests, not the interests of the people. And we don't have time to get into Khomeiни's return to Iran. However, we saw how the Shah of Iran, one of the greatest allies of the United States, was treated. He was a man of stature, of diplomacy, of engagement. He took Iran to great heights, and then he was treated extremely poorly by his closest friends. So again, that begs us to think why certain things happen. And I always tell my students, who I force to watch your show and book and read your book, follow the money. And I think that, again, puts the responsibility on us to be smart consumers of the news, to be journalists that captures these nuances and these stories and grievances of people on the ground. Because if we know these contextualized elements, then we can shape public discourse and public perception that will maybe, just maybe, in the next generation, prevent such policies that would have adverse impact on the civil societies.
Can I just add to that and to the gentleman's absurdity aspect? There are people and there are websites called Polymarket and Kalshi where people are betting on when the next invasion of Lebanon is, when Khamenei is died. Kalshi currently has a suit with some people who have bet on the death of Khamenei, and they're waiting to get paid and whatnot. So the absurdity of following the money goes down and has infected people on the ground in that asset.
Who wants to take?
It is brainwashing indeed, and we try to work on this. Agreed. Right. That's why it's a war of misinformation and disinformation. Regarding the
with the lady in
yes.
green, just answer the question about the extension of the war.
Yes. So in that aspect, if you haven't heard that the French president Macron is extremely involved with trying to mediate on behalf of Lebanon with regards to Israel. He had a phone call today with the president as well as the prime minister of Lebanon in order to try to facilitate moving forward. I remember that there was a information coming out after the G7 meeting, the security meeting that happened between the emergency meeting that happened with the G7. Macron was the only one that came out confused, going, "What? We still don't know what Trump's end goal is." He said it publicly. So I think Europe, in a sense, is kind of standing by. But with regards to former colonial interests, France is trying to force its way in. Spain is trying to be more vocal on that aspect. But I'm sure others have more to say.
Yes, the British, Europe seems to be focusing on Lebanon as maybe somewhere it can help, given that it can't do anything about what's happening in Iran. And the British are citing the situation in Lebanon as the reason for rather belatedly sending their boat, which left yesterday, I think, like a week after the French one arrived. And also to add about Russia and China, I don't see them getting involved because Russia's got its handful in Ukraine and China is not an expansionist power in that way. Its eyes are on Southeast Asia, the South China Sea, Taiwan. It's focused very much on there. But and it doesn't have a deep water navy. It can't project its influence as far as Iran. It will also be, Iran is also very crucial for China because it gets so much of its energy from Iran and it's at the intersection of so many Chinese trade routes. They'll also be wanting to keep a hands-off approach because they might need to have a good relationship with the new guys, and that could be very much to their advantage in a trade position in the world. And they didn't have good relations with the Islamic Republic, although they are ostensibly on their side because they're not on the American side
The
of
friend
things.
of the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
They have clashed with them over a lot of things. The Iranians are very disappointed in the Chinese for not investing more in their economy. The Chinese have been very circumspect about not triggering sanctions retaliation from America, all that kind of thing. But I think it's to the benefit of Russia and China because this is going to weaken America. They could run through goodness knows how much of their missiles and anti-missiles and goodness knows what else. And having been on the receiving end of some of the Russian missiles in Ukraine, I'm very worried for the Ukrainians because all these anti-missile systems are being uprooted and sent off to the Middle East. And the Ukrainians are still begging for more, and they're probably even more unlikely to get them right now. And if this does end up weakening America in some way, the Americans have forecast that the Chinese could move on Taiwan as early as 2027. That's a year away, 1 year away from now. How long is this war going to last? What condition will the American military be at that point? So in that sense, it's very alarming.
All right, I think we will end it there. We overran slightly, a little bit more than slightly. It feels like this is the kind of conversation that we should continue. So if some of you are willing to go and have a drink in the bar, I hope you'll join us down there. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I want to say a couple of things. One is, if you did enjoy tonight and you are considering joining the Frontline Club, then do speak to some of the people at the back. Martin in particular. The Frontline Club isn't, and of course, Connor, apologies, who actually has Persian heritage. So this isn't just a club for journalists. People are leaving during the advert part of the evening. But it's not just a club for journalists. It is also a club for people in politics and diplomacy. We will be back here. I'll be back here next Wednesday for a conversation with Rima Laf about her new book on Syria with Hala Garani. If you are interested in attending that, please buy tickets soon. I think we're going to sell out probably by tomorrow morning. But I'd like to see you here next Wednesday. In the meantime, Tariq Ngarlu, Renad Mansour, Liz Sly, Tariq Ali Ahmed, all of the Frontline staff, and all of you for coming. Thank you very much.